Welcome. I'm J. Michael Silver, and this is Foundational Steps, the show where I talk with people about the choices they've made in their life to get where they are now. In this episode, I'm talking with Veronica Leone, former corporate lawyer turned spiritualist. We jump right into the spiritual stuff in this one right out of the gate. She's a close friend, so we go there. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Links for Veronica and timestamps for everything that came up while we talked are below. Please support the show by leaving a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Check out our affiliate links for cool things you may find valuable. Enjoy our conversation. Welcome. All right. It's all real now because we're recording.
Yeah, it's official.
So, yeah, because we know each other so well, I figure no cold chat. Let's just dive into the meat, to the depth. So at what point in time in your memory do you recall being in your body, making decisions, looking around and saying, the choices I'm making are affecting my reality? Or the world around me is actually being impacted by the choices I make. And that could be when you're 2 years old, it could be when you're 30 years old, whatever pops out to you right now. That seems to be the most prominent memory of having a very conscious awareness that your decisions and choices matter.
Yeah. In hindsight, there's situations that have probably popped up in my youth where I'm like, that I manifested that or something like it. But the big one that pops out to me is I read a book, don't know the name of it, that's not helpful, that said your spiritual guides can send you signals. And the most common ways they send you signals is through feathers or coins. Mm-hmm. And I finished the chapter. I had to go to work. I closed the book, and in my lap was a feather. And I said,
"That's pretty trippy."
No. I was like, no. I did not ask for the feather, because the book said you ask your guides and then they provide the affirmation. And I hadn't said, "Hey guides, give me a feather." And we'll get into me switching from probably lawyer to spiritual, but it was very by the facts, very needed, concrete. I'm a concrete proof kind of person. So I said no. But now I want a feather. So, hey, guides. And I had a theory that my grandmother was on my council. So I said, Grandma, Margaret, send me a feather. Then I got in the car, I drove to work, and I had to slam on my brakes. And I mean like a whole body jolt slam on my brakes so a duck could cross Wilshire in front of my car. And then this duck, for people not in LA, Wilshire is very popular, like 2 lanes going each direction, 4 lanes of traffic, constant traffic, not a great duck path. And there's no duck crossing signs. But the duck comes in front of my car and does like a slow turn and stares at me, I swear, into my soul, for what was probably 2.5 minutes, but felt like an hour. Yeah. Like a really long, like cars being like, "Why aren't you driving?" situation. And then the duck passes. So I don't know how much that's like me shaping reality versus me just realizing that there's something else out there beyond just the physical plane. Maybe they're interchangeable. I don't know. But it became a consistent theme for me in my life of whenever I have doubts, which is regularly, I would ask for some kind of sign. And depending on how low I feel, the bigger my request would get. But it was maybe just a month after that duck crossing the road, I went to, I remember if it was our Palm Springs trip. Were you on that trip to Palm Springs?
The one for New Year's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So on that, the one that had the tortoises in the backyard?
Yes.
Okay, so you know this, we went on a trip to Palm Springs, a bunch of friends for New Year's, and the Airbnb we stayed at had two tortoises, Sunny and Cher, that stayed in the backyard. And the instructions in the Airbnb were leave the tortoises alone. But the very first night, the hot tub was broken. So the owner came over to fix the hot tub and he ended up chatting with us. And of course, fell in love with us, thought we were great. So by the end, we're like pals. And he was like, oh yeah, that's Sunny and Cher. And you could feed them. You can give them basically red fruits. So strawberries, tomatoes, that kind of thing. So I'm a huge animal lover. So instantly I'm hanging out with the tortoises, giving them the fruit. Well, I am telling our other friend, Mary, the story about the duck crossing the road. And I'm like, you would not believe this. This duck like changed my life, crossed the road in front of my car. And so now I'm asking for feathers for signs. And as I'm telling the story about the duck crossing the road, Sunny goes from across the yard. He's in the far, far corner. He lives under like a little patch in the corner of the yard, crosses the entire length of the yard. If I was good with distance, I'd tell you how far, but I'm not. And he walks up to my foot and puts his little turtle claw foot onto my shoe. I was watching Mizzy cross, but straight up tapped me. And I looked down and in Sunny's mouth was a feather. And like halfway across the yard, I was like, what's in his mouth? What is that? What's going on? What's over there? And yeah, it just blew my mind. And
How did Mary react to that?
You know, there was so early on in my spiritual relationship that I think they all thought I was a little like, what's happening to Veronica? Like, this isn't normal conversation that I would have. So I just remember a general, like, what kind of a thing? Why does he have it became more inquisitive. Why does he have a feather? How did he get that feather? Where'd that feather come from? I think the folks became a little bit more on like, how does a turtle get a feather in his mouth and crawl across the yard and not spit it out versus
he's on a mission.
Veronica's a superhero or something. Yeah, he's on a mission. And I remember calling my sister, and I had read like 2 books before that. And I said, is it weird that I want to change my entire perspective of the world based off of reading 2 books and seeing a duck? She's like, yeah, that's normal. That's fine.
People do it for less.
People do it for less. And I thought of the story I would tell if I was in like an old school insane asylum. I'd be like, no, you don't understand. There was a duck. There was a duck across the road and it gave me a feather, you know, like, but it did change me.
Funny. I used to think that I'd be happier in life if I was in my interpretation of an insane asylum, you know, the padded walls, and of course I wanted to outfit it with bungee cords in the corners so that I could bounce so like if I'm gonna have padded walls, I want to be able to bounce and bounce off the walls, literally. It's so much more fun.
I love it.
But I'm like, I could totally entertain myself all day long, every day. Like it would be fantastic. I still kind of think I would be able to entertain myself and enjoy that. I would want nature. So if I could have both the padded room with the bungee cords and nature, that would be even more ideal.
And pasta. I would want pasta.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I've always
food if I think about random scenarios, like being deserted on an island, I don't think, oh, what would I eat? I just think about what I would build and how I would spend my days, which is very relaxing, very enjoyable.
How funny. Yeah, I think about the coconuts instantly. I'm like, on an island, all those coconuts, hopefully it's one of the islands that has coconuts.
Well, yeah.
Leaves or something. But yeah, I guess that's some Taurus in me, because I always think I don't care that much about food when people talk about Tauruses and food, but maybe not. Maybe I do, because I definitely think about coconuts when I think about deserted island situations.
It's fair. I mean, if I sit and think long enough, I'll come to food. But that's not where my first thoughts are going. So let's rewind for a second. Your big moment with the duck after reading this book that you don't remember the name of, which I think doesn't matter. And ultimately, if anyone else goes and reads that book, they're not going to have the same experience you're going to have. Maybe it's going to be more intense. Maybe it's going to be similar. Maybe it will just be like, well, that was a load of shit. And they're going to move on. So it doesn't really matter what the book is.
It's in my Kindle account. If you really want it, I can find it for your show notes.
Nah, if someone wants to ask and someone, needs to say, oh my God, I want to know what this book is, then, they're going to leave a comment or reach out in some way, and then we'll go back and find out and give it to them.
Okay.
So you were an adult, had a full career as a corporate lawyer, by the time you came on this path. So you've already experienced quite a bit of life, made lots of huge decisions in your life and big choices that got you to a point where you were a successful corporate lawyer, living that, American dream life, which might just all be a bullshit dream, to keep people occupied. Or maybe it's, I don't know, it is what it is. So would you consider now, with your new conception of consciousness, your new conception of making decisions and choices based off of your awareness and your groundedness in life, how would you compare that to earlier moments in your life, when you were a child, or when you were a young adult, or going to law school? How would you compare? Like, how do you look at the difference between levels of consciousness or awareness?
Well, I think probably from very early on, I kind of stopped making decisions for myself, or maybe never really made decisions for myself after young childhood. And
wait,
now,
does that mean you made choices? You had a conscious awareness that you were making a choice for yourself, that you wanted something as a child?
no, I just like to think that young me, before all my conditioning, was probably a more whole person, and making proper decisions and doing things that lit me up and, fulfilled me. Sure. And then as soon as I started realizing other people's emotions got involved, and the family dynamics and social conditioning and all that kind of stuff, I stopped really tuning into myself and making my own decisions. I guess two of the big examples is deciding what college to go to. My family, I have a stepbrother who's 6 months older than me, so we're the same year. And my family had strongly hinted that it would be much cheaper for us if we went to the same school, and we could share housing, we could share a car. And he really wanted to go in state, which was in Texas at the time. And I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, but California was calling me. I thought maybe UCLA, something like that. Sure. But he really wanted the University of Texas. And so I said, okay, I'll just go there, because I was in the top 10%. So I knew at the time it was automatic enrollment, as long as you fill out all the paperwork and all that kind of thing. And I didn't apply to any other school. I said, that's where you want to go? We'll do that. And I got in, and he did not. That backfired. So he got into his second school, Texas Tech, and then we beat them in football, like, mercilessly every year of the 4 years that I was there.
How far apart are Texas Tech and
a few hours? They're both Texas Tech is in Lubbock, and UT is in Austin, Texas. So
the whole sharing of the car never happened then?
Oh no. That was not good. No, we were way too far away for that. Yeah. But yeah, I just said, okay, whatever school you want to go to. And same with law school. I was sort of stuck and didn't really know what to do. And my dad was like, well, just go to law school and then you can figure it out. And I'm one of the few people that I know that had no interest in going to law school. I didn't have like dreams of being a lawyer or dreams of making lawyer money. I just was stuck. I was in a rut, didn't really know where to go. And so dad said, go to law school. And I was like, okay.
Dad's a lawyer. So yeah,
Dad's a lawyer. Yeah. And it worked really well for him. And he worded it, you'll know your rights, so you won't get taken advantage as much. So that's always good to know. It's 3 years. 3 years goes by pretty fast. I'm a very avid reader. I had no troubles in school with the classic learning systems. So it didn't seem that daunting to me.
Which university did you go to for law school?
Pepperdine.
Okay. Oh, so you did make it out to California for law school then?
Yeah. Well, I was already Um, I didn't know what my major should be. It sounds painful when I look back at just like how in tune I was with myself. I think it's just a lot of the things that felt right to me, I didn't feel like were practical. And so I didn't do them. So at first I wanted to do film or storytelling in some way. And I just didn't think, the starving artist, that was a valid career choice. So I was like, I don't know what. And my dad had majored in psychology, got his PhD in psychology first. So I said, okay, I'll do psychology. And I did
this
that.
Is after UT?
This was at UT. This is
at UT. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know what school to go to, and I didn't know what major to do. So I started doing psychology, which was interesting, but just not, wasn't lighting me up. And I took all the film electives that I could. And after a year, I was like, I don't really want to do this. I don't really know what to do. I'm leaning towards film more. And my dad was like, do film. I was like, what? Like, I always thought he was going to be so, judgmental is not the right word, but disappointed in me if I didn't have some huge, like, lawyer, doctor kind of a thing. Cause he's really a titan in his fields. And he was like, it would be me versus the entire family, like me versus 8 people in the board game Seen It, which is like movie trivia.
Yeah.
And I would sweep the floor with him like every time.
Yeah, I remember that game. I used to play that game. I don't know if I still have, but I had a couple different versions of it. You throw the DVD in. I don't own a DVD player, so if I still have it, can't play it. But
yeah. Oh, this was in like 2000 or something like that. But he goes, yeah, you should do film. Like, you memorize every writer and director and the producers' names and who does that. And so he was extremely supportive. Every time I've actually made a decision for myself, surprise, surprise, people have been very supportive. So I don't know
funny how that works.
I don't know where I picked up this thing that I'm going to be a great disappointment to people unless I do what they want me to do. But I lived my life that way. And it took me a while to not blame other people for it too. I kept being like, well, my dad wants me to go to law school. It was only, I don't know, maybe turning 30, maybe my Saturn return, I don't know, where I started saying, I made that decision. I mean, I asked them for their advice and I did it because they suggested it, but I did make that decision. And poor me, I have a law degree, so it worked out fine. But
and you got to work at big entertainment companies and work on major contracts with major stars and multi-million-dollar contracts. Met rubbed elbows with a lot of famous people, and which I didn't really care, but I did do. You care when they're good people.
I cared when it was Lucy Lawless, which was the first time I completely choked and didn't say anything. We were at a premiere and I was behind her in line, and I was like, this is the moment, and I can't do it. I couldn't do it. And I don't get starstruck. I really don't.
It's Xena?
But because it's Xena. I wanted to be Xena. I watched every episode. I did her war cries. And I don't mean like every episode. I mean like every episode multiple times. I recorded it on a VCR when I was in like 5th grade. She's my hero. So I couldn't do it. Yeah.
So
I went off on a tangent somewhere.
No. This is all good stuff. So you were making decisions primarily based on what other people thought would be good choices and somewhat of people pleasing. You had a little bit of in the back of your head, well, I like film. I want to be around, storytelling. So that kind of led you to LA. So there's some level of, your desires sneaking through to get you where you're at now. So at what point in time was the big shift? Were you starting to become miserable as a lawyer, or like what made you go, I need to be more in tune with myself. I need to be more conscious. I need to be more proactive and active in my consciousness and my decision-making and the choices, like where can you pinpoint 1 or 10 things that got you to want to focus and got you to want to, kind of become more alive?
Yeah. So I think it didn't start out as, yes, I never enjoyed the law. I really didn't. I enjoyed the people I worked with immensely, but the actual law didn't do anything for me. So there was always a missing joy element happening, right? Or always wanting more. I didn't seek it out. It found me in a couple different ways. The first was a couple different friends, like 3 different times, joked, "Hey, we should go see a psychic," for fun. And I have a strong religious upbringing, that I thought psychics only worked in dark alleys at night. And so it would always pop up at like 11 p.m. and we'd be like, okay. And then we'd spend like 2 hours scouring LA trying to find a psychic, and it wouldn't work. And it happened multiple times, each time with someone else suggesting it, not me. And finally, the third person was my sister. I had a back surgery, and she came into town to help like rearrange my entire apartment. And we were going to reupholster this chair that was my grandmother's, this old rocking chair. And we were on our way to the fabric store. And my sister, seemingly out of nowhere, said, "We should see a psychic," which is not something she's ever suggested. And I said,
and just for anyone listening, your sister is also a lawyer.
Yes.
She works as a public defender, right?
She was a public defender for many years, and now she does wills and estates law.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's one of the good lawyers that doesn't take the money, and she helps people.
Right. So also very pragmatic, very smart, and in a very non-woo-woo career path.
Yes.
As I want to, especially with you, I want to clarify that for anyone listening, that, you know, when I met you, you were not into any of this at all. You were just this corporate lawyer, extremely smart. Game nights, you know, no one wanted to play against you. You were always like, "I want Veronica on my team," because your knowledge and your ability to critical think and rational think is exceptionally high, for anyone I've ever met. You definitely rank up there in terms of, you know, people that I've met over the last 40 some years, that have the ability to critically think and rationalize and be grounded in all of it. So it was a real trip, you know, when you first wanted to talk about the woo-woo stuff, the spiritual stuff.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, people who knew me eight years ago, 6 years ago, like, seen a total transformation.
Oh yeah. Night and day. I mean, you're still the same person, but the way you come at things is night and day different, because your base for your ground, your foundation of rational critical thinking is so high beyond the vast majority of the people I've ever met, that you no longer, that's just second nature, that's just instinct. So you no longer have to even put any work into being rationally critical and objective in your looking at something. So to see you allow that to support your what some people would call irrational or emotional or not ephemeral,
intangible
thought pattern now, is very interesting. And it makes it a lot harder, I think, for people who want to dismiss woo-woo, intangible, ephemeral ideas and concepts, because you can very quickly pull in rationale and point to this, that, and everything else, and like, explain that. Can you?
What about the deck? Huh?
So
yeah.
You know, given that perspective, your sister says, who's not too dissimilar from you, you know, your father created 2 very smart legal minds. Your sister says, "Let's go see a psychic." and then what happens?
So I say, okay, Google psychic Santa Monica. And she does. And the first woman she calls is in New York. She's not available. Second one doesn't pick up. And then my sister immediately gets a call back, and she answers. And the woman says, hello, who's this? My sister explains. She goes, how'd you get this number? And my sister goes, off your website. And she goes, no, how'd you get this number? My sister's like, off of your website. And she's like, no, you're calling my personal cell. I don't have that on the website. And there was this weird back and forth of, who are we talking to? How do we get this number? What's going on? And I'm sitting driving and I'm like, oh, she's good. She's good. Right. Cause like, this is her thing she does. She just calls from another phone number and says, how'd you get this number? Like, I'm not impressed, whatever. Anyways. So then at the end, they clear it up. It doesn't matter. The psychic says that kind of stuff happens to her all the time in technology. Sure. But she doesn't have an opening anyway. So have a nice day. So it was all for naught. And I think we just give up at that point.
Wait, and then, did you check the website to see if the number that she called was the same number?
Yeah. So the number my sister called originally was the website number. The number the woman called back on was a different number. But fast forward later, we end up seeing that psychic and I see her phone because we asked her about it. And she did get a call on her cell from my sister when my sister never called her cell. So it was a trip. Yeah. They were like both right in their own little
some sort of weird happened. Forwarding glitch. Maybe
she used to have it forward and stopped and it got messed up or something. Who knows? But maybe an hour later, she calls and says, my 3 o'clock just canceled. This is the second odd thing that's happened. I'm probably meant to see you. Are you close? Do you have any chance that you could still get here? And we look and it turns out her office, which is in the back of her house, is like 6 blocks away from where I live. Which we hadn't looked up the address. I mean, it's Santa Monica, so it's not that big of a stretch, but so we dropped. Still,
Santa Monica is several miles in multiple directions. So
right. So we go over there 10 minutes later, and she does a reading for us. And this was my first time, sitting in front of a psychic or medium or clairvoyant or anything in that kind of sense. And she said, I have a grandmother spirit. I think her name is Margaret. She wanted to say that she brought the two of you here together and you were working on something of hers, which was a trip because it's my grandmother Margaret and it's her chair. And she didn't say like, oh, I think it's an M name, she went straight to the name. She went to my sister, you've got 3 kids. She said their ages. She quoted just a lot of stuff that was very specific. I have an uncle who recently passed that I'm really, back then it was recent, now it's not, that it was really close to. And she said, I also have an uncle presence here. And he says to tell you he collected boxes, which is random, but my uncle Stan did collect boxes, trinket boxes. He would have cigar boxes or tea boxes or, a wide variety of boxes. And when he passed away, my aunt let everyone who went to the reception take a box home with them. So I said that to her. I said, yeah, he collected boxes and people were allowed to take boxes home with them to remember him by. And she goes, well, you didn't have to take them at the funeral. You got them earlier and you have 4 of them. Which is true. I didn't need to take one because I had, prime choice of the boxes before everyone else got to them. And I had 4 of them. Now I have even more. I've got like 10 or something. Every time I go back to my aunt's house, I get another box. But
so none of the normal mentalist tricks. So mentalism, for anyone that's not familiar, mentalism is the practice or art form that carnival psychics or people who are faking it or whatever use to, do cold readings, warm readings, and basically get people to tell them what they need to know in order to make them seem like real psychics. Right. And I could go on for another hour on mentalism and the relationship to quote unquote real psychics. And I put that in parentheses for a variety of reasons that we won't go into right now. But she's clearly not using the mentalism tricks by saying, no, you had X number of boxes before that. I mean, that's not in the,
Yeah, she didn't go, he was a collector, wasn't he? And I was like, oh yeah, he did collect things. Yes, he was. It wasn't coins. I'm like, no, it's boxes, but it wasn't like, it wasn't fishing. It wasn't throwing out random letters. It wasn't general comments about my mood or, well, you seem like a very competitive kind of person. You seem like a very, she wasn't just giving out generalizations. Right. She was without me prompting, not mentioning that I had
specific names, specific numbers,
specific numbers. which is what I would needed to think that anything was remotely true. I would have needed some hard, concrete things. And she threw one out after another, and did it all with humor. She used to be a stand-up comic. Shirley Lipner is this woman, by the way, and I highly recommend you find her, follow her, have her enrich your life. But yeah, she used to do stand-up comedy, and I think people used to, I don't know if they were heckling or just throwing out information, but she'd say, I don't know if this is an exact example, but, oh, maybe you hang out with like your dog. Like, who's got a dog here? Sir, you've got a dog? What's your dog's name? Like Wolfie? Okay, so you and Wolfie are walking down the street. You know, she would just have audience participation. And then afterwards, the guy would come up to her and say, how did you know my dog's name is Wolfie? Which is a Terminator 2 reference for anyone paying attention. But yeah, so things like that. So she started realizing that the things that she was channeling and coming into her were actual information, not, but anyway, so that was the first thing that opened me up to, oh, interesting. There's more to it, but not only that, my loved ones are involved in some way. People who are super close to me are talking through her. So that comes into big play later in my life, when I struggle a lot with, if any of the stuff that I deal with is demonic. I hold on to little things like that feel really true, that feel really like it's things that people who are close to me are connecting to me, which is how I feel like it's a safe space. Anyway, so I saw her and I took a screenshot. She had a bunch of books stacked on her desk, and I took a screenshot of the books, and then I went home and proceeded to read all the books to figure out, like, what is this woman reading? What is this woman doing? So that kind of started me on going into a whole new place. And then as far as my actual awareness and decision-making and all that kind of thing, that probably triggered with human design. And it wasn't one of the books she had. First, I read a book, Many Masters, Many Lives, which introduced me to past lives. I shared a Kindle account with my sister. So any books that I would read, she would read, and vice versa. I don't know if I should have admitted that. I'm gonna edit that out. Anyways, I give her my Kindle account, and whatever, I'll own it. And so she had downloaded a book that I thought was one of Shirley's books, and that was the book with the feather. But it turns out it was just a random recommendation on Amazon. And normally just a random book off of Amazon, I wouldn't give credit like I would give credit a book that was specifically on the desk of somebody who I thought was legitimate.
Right.
And when I got that book that I can't remember, it talked about signs, and it talked about your counsel and guides. And then it goes a hard left and talks about like Merlin and fairies and dwarves being real. And I got to the end of the book and I was like, I don't know about this. We'll just start with the feathers and the signs. And had I known that book was not on the stack of books, I probably would have threw out everything once I got to the Merlin part at that point in my journey. But because I had confused the Kindle account and thought it was part of that stack, I like took the next step. It's really interesting, the things that are like hidden and not. But when I got to human design, I discovered.
Go ahead and give a quick just summary of what human design is, because that, for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to be as prolific as you'd think. I feel like people who know what it is, or at least on a level enough to understand the basics. So, and by the basics, I mean that it's a divination, tool, like astrology. So give your best under 2-minute explanation of what human design is, just in case anyone is like, what the hell is this nonsense?
Yeah, the classic way that they describe it is a blueprint of your energetics. It combines Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Jewish Kabbalah, tree of life structure, the Hindu chakra system, and like the human genome code, and puts it all into one chart. And I couldn't imagine how to do that all by hand, but you don't have to. You can type it into a computer. My Human Design, Jenna Zoe, she's a leader in the field. You can get your chart there. mybodygraph.com, jovianarchive.com, geneticmatrix.com. Those are all places you can dive into different ways.
Have you tried, never Never thought about this before, but have you tried to enter your birth and time and all that other stuff into all of the different sites to see if there's any disparities between the different calculators?
I have. I listened to one of a podcast. I think it was maybe the De Luna podcast, but a podcast on human design specifically. And they had that where a couple of people had mentioned, I think it was specifically when they did mybodygraph.com, which was one of the original ones, in Jovian Archive. So two of the oldest sites. And that a couple of people had some disparities between the two. And so that made me check them all for my own. You know,
yeah,
and
lawyer,
and Jenna Zoe had addressed that on her Instagram and on her site, that was a problem she kept seeing, and as a result, she did her own hired her own, I don't know who's in charge of that, astrologers, astronomers, programmers, all of them, to calculate everything properly to get rid of that problem. So she had said that was addressed. I use my human design with clients and with myself just because I like how it looks, and it just feels connected to a specific person. I don't feel like I'm just throwing things out into the ether. I don't know, I'm exchanging with the person who I respect.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
So for practical purposes with human design, I think for entry level, it says that there's 5 types of energetic people. Each type, well, one is a hybrid, 4 and a hybrid, depending on who you talk to. But they each have a different way that their aura works. They each have something that's called a strategy, sort of how they should make their decisions in life, and their authority, the part of themselves that helps them make those decisions that are in alignment for them. And it changes based off of your type, and then based off of, you have 9 centers. So the classic Hindu chakra system would be 7. Human design says we've evolved and now have 9. We're going to evolve more later to have 2 more in our hands, but currently 9. And then each center is either defined, so you put your own energy out through that center that's consistent, that's your own, or undefined, which is you bring in the energy of other people through those centers. So when you look at the chart, you figure out how your energy is working, how you're taking in energy from other people, how you're affecting other people energetically. And then there's also, of course, transits, because astrology is based. So different parts of your chart lights up and you have different aspects to your energetics based off of just the days.
Have you ever counted how many different moving parts there are?
No.
I mean, astrology, Western astrology says 12 planets.
Yeah, so there's
144.
There's 2 in astrology. There's the 2 luminaries. You do the sun and the moon. You also count. You have the Earth, but you don't usually use that point. Then you have the original 7, which was just the planets you could see with the visual eye, and then you later added the outer 3. Now that we have technology, so you could see them. So usually you're talking about 10 total when you're dealing with astrology.
Okay.
But that you're not counting Earth. I mean, you can, but when they're talking about it, generally they're not referencing Earth, and they're including the sun and the moon.
And the I Ching is hexagrams, and there's 8 primary, which gives you 64. It's a base 64 system.
Yeah, and it lines up with the human genome code, which is the 64. I'm not a scientist. Right. I'm not even going to pretend.
The only reason why, because people get really turned off oftentimes with woo-woo stuff, and they look at astrology and they think of the horoscopes in the newspaper. They don't understand the math that goes into it.
So much math.
And the thing that I find interesting about human design is that there's a ridiculous amount of math going on. And so people who are science minded or think that, things are more black and white and there's nothing esoteric that is real, and that if you can't measure it, then you can't quantify it and you can't change it, and it holds no value. And human design, the interesting thing is they actually do measure everything, and everything has a mathematical value, and everything is calculatable, which to me, for people who don't like woo-woo, but somehow or another find themselves attracted to simulation theory because it's mathematical or scientific, is like, well, human design probably lines up better with simulation theory than anything else, that is mathematical or scientifically based. And so like the smartest people, like, Elon Musk and all of the people that he hires to do mathematical modeling to go to space, that are into the idea of simulation theory, human design, in my estimation, is the closest mathematical model to actually chart and understand the mathematics behind what we would call simulation theory.
I love it. Yeah. Each part of human design is a lifelong study, right? People study the I Ching their entire lifetimes, and admit that they don't even grasp everything that's involved in it. Same with astrology. Geez, I have just started in the past, I don't know, maybe 2 years diving into astrology, and it is so complex and so in depth. If you think about a lot of the people that we classically considered the great minds of our time, Einstein, Galileo, like they were all astronomers and astrologers. I think people kind of lose that. And also a lot of their archetypes, right? There's tons of archetypes in astrology, but those archetypes are based off of years and years and years of them studying, of doing data points of, okay, if the sun is right here and this is over here, and I was born on this day, this is what happens. What about for that guy? Over and over and over and over and over and over, right? So the math is just, extreme in depth. But also you're not going to fully grasp everything, because each part of it is a full life study. And you just get more, just the layers just keep unpeeling for me as I go deeper and deeper. But yeah, it's concrete. And the most concrete thing to me of human design is when I tried it, when I looked at my chart, when I got a reading and it was like somebody telling me who I was for the first time. One of the podcasts I listened to, there was a guest who talked about something she calls truth tears. They just coined it. It was cute. And I was on a road trip and listening to it. And it was when you cry, and it's not necessarily joy or sadness. It's just something hits you as being so true.
Yeah.
That it brings you to tears. And when I listened to the description of a manifesting generator, which is the type that I am in human design, it brought truth tears to me. I just felt seen and for maybe the first time, and understood myself just from that one aspect. When we talk about awareness, so manifesting generators, short version is they have their sacral defined. That's the center that's defined. And also their throat, but so they generate constant energy. So they have the ability to work hours and hours and hours on something if it lights them up. But they also have this manifestor quality of them. This is the hybrid between a manifestor type and a generator type, where they pivot. So it's kind of like the classic jack of all trades, but a master of none. And I hate that I don't remember the rest of that quote, because it's actually not a terrible. Do you know it? You just nodded like you knew what I'm talking.
I was just. I don't know if I'll be able to repeat it, but let's see, a jack of all trades, but a master of none gives you, I don't know. It's a super positive thing. It's one of those things that, someone basically was trying to oppress people and trying to assert dominance and truncated the quote. And in truncating the quote, it basically created a cultural phenomenon. I think mostly in earlier generations. Like I think that quote, the truncated version, is not propagated or put out there as much, because people have realized it's a load of shit and it's incomplete. Did you find the full quote?
Yeah. Jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than the master of one.
Yeah. I knew it rhymed, which is why I was like, I'm never going to be able to repeat it.
Something. Yeah, but I definitely felt like I was a master of none, because I would start something and then I would leave it. and I just felt like I never had anything to show for it, nothing at the end to be like, even when I tell people like I've gone to law school, I still to this day I have to like tell myself I feel like I have nothing to show for my life. I've just done a bunch of different things
Yeah,
and never to like a point of completion. And so, and it's also the millennial thing too, right? They're like, oh, the millennials can't keep, their job, or they just want to eat avocado toast all day. And I do want to eat avocado toast all day. So maybe it's true, but I just found out that these manifesting generators, they are designed to test and taste a bunch of different things and then tell people about them and move on. So they're like a scout for if you were in the military. Like, you go out, you see what there is, you come and you report back, and then you go out again. And they're the ones that create new things that you never even thought was possible, because they're taking all these different parts and they're putting them together and then going somewhere else. So having just permission to quit things and not feel guilty about it, not feel like a quitter, was a huge moment for me.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple parts of my chart specifically.
Actually, let's dig into that for a half a second. So we go from having, being very smart, being very, driven with accomplishing whatever you need to accomplish for what you put your mind to needing a deeper level of awareness, consciousness, engagement in your life, more personal engagement in your life, leads you unconsciously and unwittingly to a psychic via your sister. And that sent you on a super educational mission to try to actually understand the esoteric woo-woo stuff from a pragmatic standpoint, so that you weren't just, free falling. Human design gave you a level of concreteness because of the ridiculous level of math involved. And, in having someone do a reading, it lit you up in a way of like, this is real. This is like, how could this possibly, all this math, and the calculations point to this, and this, and that's 100% who I am. So now you're on this path to utilize these techniques and to be more engaged on a personal level with your life. How did that change your happiness, joy, contentment? Those are all kind of different things, but how did that affect your just mental well-being when you started traveling down this road of a much more, what most would consider, non-objective path, even though you're making it, you're doing it in a very objective way? How did this affect your mental state?
I think the biggest thing is all the different parts just gave me permission to not know and to be okay. Like, okay, for example, human design, the G center, it's your identity center, your love center. For me, it's undefined. So that means someone like me will take on a bunch of different identities of different people. That's the chameleon in high school, that I could go hang out with the goth kids. No offense to the goth. I just put on some black eyeliners, some, black go club, hang out with them. And they're not like, who's that chick? And then I can go hang out with the cheerleader squad. I can I don't know, I can't do a backflip, but do something that cute cheerleaders do and seem completely normal and, fine. And blend in there and be this social chameleon and talk to different people in different ways and blend. And so in one sense, I belonged everywhere. But what would happen to me is I felt like I'm just blending with all these other people, but I don't fit with any of them. Exactly. I don't really know who I am. Like, I had a problem that I feel like people didn't see me. Like, they'd say things about me and I'd be like, that's not me, but I don't know who I am. I had a big identity of just like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I should do. I don't, whatever. And human design labels it. They say, yeah, you have an identity center and yours open. So energetically, you just take on the identities of everybody else. And so your gift is, I can hang out with this person, sense who they truly are, and then help them discover it because I'm taking in that energy and showing it to them.
We have that in common, don't we?
Oh, I'd have to look probably. I should have pulled up your chart before this, but I've looked at so many lately, I can't remember. Although you often feel like you really know who you are, so I'm not sure. But if that resonates, we'll look it up. I'll report back. So like I dated this guy who did improv, and I found myself surprisingly like a couple of weeks into dating doing improv. And I didn't even put it, like, I got classes at the theater he teaches at, and did not put it together until much later when I was learning human design that I don't care about improv.
Yeah.
I was just he'd done improv for like 15 years, Alex. So I was just taking on his, and I started painting. He was a painter, started taking on that identity. Anyways, so just not feeling seen and not knowing like who I am. Like, I don't know who I am. Like, what kind of person doesn't know who they are? Like, what is that? But then I got into human design and I was like, most people, a lot of people, I think it's like 37% or something like that have an undefined G center. But I also have a completely open ajna. So the ajna in human design is like the processing, mental processing plant. But it deals a lot with answering questions and certainty and needing to feel like you're certain about something. People who have defined ajnas can feel certain. People who have undefined ajnas have to realize that they're never going to find certainty. Not really, not 100%. And so when it came time to decision making, I never really felt certain that it was the right choice. So what I would do is I'd ask you and I'd ask you and I'd ask you and I asked Dad, and Dad would be like, well, just go to law school. And so I'd be like, okay, I'll go to law school. Because I don't know, because even when I'm like, okay, I'm going to go see this movie, I'd still be like, should I go see this movie? Like, there's always just like a little part of me that's like analyzing it and taking in other people's ways of thoughts of how they do it and not quite being sure about it.
And so all of this experience of this mathematical process that human design employs gave you the confidence or the freedom to let go of worrying about any of that.
Yeah, I didn't think about the math at the time. I just thought like they just told me like, oh yeah, do you never feel certain about anything? That's actually a gift, because then you can just go into the experience and see what happens.
Yeah. And mindfulness, in the practice of mindfulness, that's considered beginner's mind. And beginner's mind is, what I would call is the first, foundational principle of mindfulness. Well, actually, really, it's non-judgment, but beginner's mind, kind of has to be it has to be what you come back to. Beginner's mind is something that I actually have kind of later to work on, from a standpoint of when you're working on mindfulness and developing your practice. But if you don't have a sense of beginner's mind, I don't think you can actually start anything, because you're going to be starting at a deficit. And so it's kind of something that is required in there, but it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit harder to get to. So I think I actually have it as like number 4 on my list of foundational steps. But anyways, this is neither here nor there.
Yeah. It just gave me permission to be like, okay, I'm only at 80%, and that's enough for me to go ahead and commit to this. And if it doesn't work out, fine. But I don't need to keep like calling 15 different people to try to figure out what the answer is. I can just tune into myself and feel what's right.
Who traded stocks were 80% positive they were going to get the return they wanted. And that would be mega amazing kind of thing, or entrepreneurs going after a business. It's like 80% is huge number of.
I always want that hundo.
I don't think 100% can exist until after the fact, which is
I don't even get it after the fact.
That's fair.
Most of the time. Most of the time I'm like, maybe that was a good idea. I don't know.
Yeah, but the looking backwards, at least you can have a 100% value of, okay, this is what it was or is for now. because the past changes maybe as much as the future, depending on our perspective and how we're looking at it. But it's easier to quantify for most people for a period of time, and then how it changes usually isn't understood because you forget what your 100% used to be.
We will not go right now into a whole discussion of time and past, present, and future, and what's what and what doesn't exist and does exist. Sure. But from human design, the way they see it with the ajna is the ajna doesn't recognize time. So it will shoulda, woulda, coulda all day long if you make decisions using your mind or your ajna. And so in human design, they say you don't actually use those areas to make your decisions. You lean towards your authority, which for me is my solar plexus. So if you make decisions from the proper place of your body that's in alignment, then you lose that your mind thinking about it later, shoulda, woulda, couldas. Are you certain or are you not? Because you're not making your decisions from the mind, you're making decisions from the body,
which is also called monkey mind in Eastern meditative practices, and it's being adopted, I think, in the Western world. I was watching something, it was an Amazon, I think it's an Amazon show called Upload, which I don't think it's in its second season. I don't know that it got great reviews. It's kind of a little bit of a fluffy show. And it just happened to be on. Ash had it on while she was working, in the background. And I sat down and I watched an episode. I think they're like 30-minute episodes. I watched an episode or maybe two with her, and they were trying to get the uploaded character, the guy who was murdered and his consciousness uploaded into this, afterlife, to control his thoughts so that the programmers couldn't read his thoughts. And they referred to it as monkey mind. And I thought that was just funny how popular Western fluffy, TV content is using, Eastern ideas and in terms of how the mind works. But anyways, monkey mind, Aja, all over the place, past, present, future, doesn't know the difference.
It's so fun when you, speaking of being able to like create your own reality, when you learn a new word and all of a sudden that word pops up everywhere. You get a new car and all of a sudden you swear your car was not that popular, and now everywhere you turn you see the same car. Like the multiverse, I feel like right now all of a sudden movies and shows and all over the place, multiverse is now like very in. Just the other day I watched
which
like two
drives me
trailers.
Nuts because I don't think it's right. I like it's, I call it the fractalverse, because if you have any understanding of physics, everything's connected. So the only truth would be, your quantum position, which we're in, until you make a decision or until you look at it, you're always in a superposition. So, from that standpoint, everything is interconnected inextricably, which would be quantum entanglement. So as soon as something comes in contact with something else, there's a level of quantum entanglement, which would suggest fractals, not multi, and so the only separation that exists, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, and so I'm literally connected to the space around me. If anyone's in this room, they're literally connected to me through their breath, and some of their molecules, not everything you breathe out is carbon dioxide. So not everything you breathe out can't be breathed in by someone else. So, not to mention we're sharing electrons. There's a whole theory in physics that there's only one electron. It's just everywhere all the time in multiple states, in multiple.
It must be a generator. It's a very busy electron. Yeah.
Right. So, the only rational thought that anyone could possibly have is, if you're into physics, which I don't understand why Sean Carroll or Brian Greene or any of these other physicists don't talk about this, but the only rational thought to have is that it's a fractal verse, because everything is connected to everything else, and everything is changing in accordance. So all of the branches aren't branches of that create other universes, but they are branches of one universe looking at it from a different angle, a different perspective. And so a shift in perspective will give you a different picture, which if you are, isolating, can look like a different universe or look like a different reality, but it's still part of the same whole. So fractalverse is the only possible reality. Multiverse is an incorrect explanation for what's going on.
I mean, that's a bold statement to say the only rational. Like you had, Michael Silver a year ago was thinking plenty of rational thoughts before he got to fractalverse. So I think we just got to be a little kind to the people who are still, not quite there.
Okay.
And maybe Michael Silver 2 years from now will be like, the only rational thought will be,
that's fair.
We're in a video game or whatever.
By saying the only rational thought is based on the given information. So as new information comes about, would be the shift or change in definition, perspective, or understanding. So when I'm making an emphatic generalization of the only rational thought, it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I've read your books, and you're missing what you're saying. You're not, you're telling me that everything's connected, and then you're trying to say, because everything's connected, it's all separate. It's like, okay, I can get down with that from a balance, a yin and yang, a duality standpoint. But if you're going to talk on, on a multidimensional layer where, dimensions can, collapse in on themselves and go outward, on the same mathematical, geometric, measurement system, then the end result would be, even if it's separate, it's still connected. So if you're trying to say your final hypothesis is that everything's separate, then you're undermining your how you got there, which is everything's connected. So it would be more appropriate to say fractalverse than multiverse based on what you're saying. So not my not my real theory, premise, or research. It's theirs. I just think they're shortchanging themselves and the rest of the world that looks at them as experts.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I do think a lot of people get to fractalverse from the multiverse, though. So at least as far as it entering into mainstream, media,
but they don't talk about it directly. So even Marvel, Marvel universe, they talk about the multiverse and they're talking about these things, but the representation of it is all fractal. So like Doctor Strange, the new movie that's coming out, if you watch the trailers, or even Spider-Man, how they represent the fractalverse or how they represent the multiverse is all through fractals, because it's the only math and it's the only system that we know of that actually connects things and actually is able to explain things or visually represent things. And it shows up in all physics, biology, and blah 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 blah. So that's the irony to me. It's like, if you're looking at something and you see it as a wall, then it's going to be an obstacle. So if you're looking at things and you keep on calling it a multiverse, then you're looking at things separate and you're not going to be able to get there. Because you can't open the door because there's no door there. So if you call it for what it is based on your explanations on physics and math, you call it for what it is, you're telling me it's a fractalverse. I'm not the math genius. I'm not the physicist, expert. I'm just listening to what you're telling me, and I'm telling me you're calling it you're calling it a multiverse, but you're saying it's all based on fractals and interconnectedness and inextricable entanglement. Well, that's described better by the words we have as a fractalverse, not a multiverse. So there doesn't need to be a wall, because there is no wall, because it's all connected. And the door, you just need to push and you go right through it. So we have the ability to connect to every other universe, because it's inextricable based on their math, based on their science. They're just not seeing it. They just need to shift their perceptions.
Call them up. Come on.
Yeah, because they're going to take my call. I've sent emails. I've sent, Instagram messages and tweets. And, what I have found is these people are just like every other, successful, wealthy person. They're too inundated and they're too overloaded. And
yeah. If you see me do this gesture sometimes, I just delete that. Yeah. That's just something you're perpetuating out there. All these fancy, busy people can't take time for, just, it's not that it's wrong. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Blech.
I'm waiting to get I love being proved wrong when I say stuff like that. I love being proved wrong when I'm like, this person won't take my calls, and they take my call. I love it. So
yeah, but expect it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I like that.
Yeah.
So we're way off track now.
I knew we would, but I have fractalverse questions. It's it's so hard for me to not. Let's just talk about me, shall we? No,
let's tie this up then. So you've gained a level of calm and comfort in how you live your life, through exploring extremely complicated concepts that on a general high level passover looks like total nonsense, and it looks like clouds of subjective trash to people out there who haven't realized that there's a hard objective mathematical underbelly to all this stuff. So, and it's giving you a calm and a comfort in the way you live your life. How has that changed your coping mechanisms? And how do you look at, obstacles now differently than you did prior to, coming to this calm, this awakening?
I think I just have there's just so much. There's so much I can't even imagine of how I'm going to get to. When you ask, every time you ask me a question, my head just explodes with 30 things that I'm like, well, this is to get. I like to explain how I get to places, and it's hard to not do that for me. It's hard for me to short circuit that and go in, but I've just learned so much about myself, not only through human design. I guess human design taught me to pay more attention to what is lighting me up. And in doing that, I uncovered this thing called to be magnetic. So I learned about shadow work and inner child work, and different gates that I have. I have one gate that talks about judgment and learning. One aspect of me. Gate 55 talks about having your own power, and you lose your power when you do victimization, and you have victimization through blaming or shaming. And so anytime I started complaining, or not blaming and shaming, complaining and blaming. So anytime I started complaining about something, I'd turn it and say, okay, that's gate 55. What's going on here? Why am I doing that? Why am I giving my power away in that way? Or anytime I started blaming somebody else, I'd say, okay, that's the same thing. It's gate 55. What's going on here? And I'll evaluate that. Then I have the shadow work and the inner child work. So if I get triggered where my reaction to something that's happened seems disproportionate to what's actually happened, then I say okay, is that something that happened to me as a kid that I need to work through? And that's why it's such a touchy subject. And I'll go meditate on it, or do, Lacey calls them deep imaginings, and do a deep imagining on it. So if I find myself complaining, I'll check in with one thing. If it's, something bad happened to me I stubbed my toe and I'm upset about it. Then I'm like, okay, why am I upset about what's this thing? What is, so I have different parts of myself that I've learned that I tap into for coping.
So essentially what I'm hearing is that human design and all of this inner work that you've done has given you an architecture to understand how you operate and internally, and your emotional, your logical, your non-logical, all the different parts of you that kind of make up your inner matrix. You now have an architecture for it, and you're able to reference all these different things, in order to, make sure you're in alignment, where before you didn't have that architecture, or you had the architecture, but you didn't understand the architecture. So the architecture wasn't illuminated to be able to process things direct.
Yeah, I guess I learned a lot of the why. Like I also have a defined emotional solar plexus in my wave. People who have human design, they'll follow this. And if not, I'll try to help. But the center that I have just says some days I'm emotionally low and some days I'm emotionally high. And it's not a good, bad dichotomy. It's just, that's how the wave is. So when I'm on the lower side, it's more melancholic. It's more, I don't want to go out and do things with people a lot of the times. I want to just like sit in with myself, or it's good for art or creativity. And if I'm in the low part of my wave, and instead I'm going out to parties, I'm not going to have a good time, and vice versa. If I'm high and I'm good and I'm feeling great, then I should honor that more. And that's the perfect time to go out to that brunch and that kind of thing. So I have my emotional aspect where I say some of my emotions are just happening, that I don't necessarily have control over or go higher or lower. And I'm allowed to feel them. So I have like that aspect. Then I can say, okay, I can take in the inner child work stuff too. So maybe I'm reacting really strongly emotionally, even more so because of something that had happened. And let's sort that out. And like, let's see if that's the case. Or maybe I just worked with a client. And so I've taken on a lot of energy with them. And so I go into like practices like grounding or take a shower or just clear or delete that kind of energy from me. So really, I just have so many tools. I just have all these little tools.
So you also have systems for dealing with it, not just the architecture, but then systems for managing each scaffolding or each building arm structure.
Right. And I've learned that there's just so much out there. I mean, I already knew this, but so much that I don't know, and being okay with that uncertainty and having permission to fail things or not complete them, that overall just being like, don't know, guess I was just human today, figure that one out, better next time. Just taking the pressure off has really helped too. That perfectionism is really letting that go.
What I think is, probably, and this is the reason why, coaches, consultants, mentors, and people are starting to gravitate towards these services more and more and more, is because people are understanding that the tools they are given from childhood usually are pretty basic, and our programming that we take on in the first few years of our life is very high level, very surface. And to navigate in this world as it becomes more and more complex and more interconnected in our dealings, people are understanding that they just don't have the understanding or the expertise or the skills. And so they find a coach, a consultant, an expert, or a guide, someone that can help them better illuminate the parts of themselves. And, I think what you've done, because you're a hyper intellectual, intense person that needs to really get, something that you're interested in or something that you're engaged in, you need a high level of understanding. So you gained a very high level of light, or reveal on your inner architectures. You're talking about Jungian psychology. You're talking about all of these high level cognitive behavioral therapy, the symphony of selves, or the IFS internal family systems. Like, you're talking about all these psychological systems that, most people have doctor, behind their name that use these systems, and you got it all from human design.
Yeah.
And, which is why people, pay you to be their life coach, because this is what you've done for yourself. And now you know how to show other people how to do it. I mean, I think that's kind of the amazing thing of the work you've done.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people go into a psychic's office and take a picture of like 15 books and then go read them all. No. And then go, oh, one of them's on numerology. Let me just go study numerology. Oh, one of them's on past lives. What's that? Let me just do some past life regression therapy. Oh, there's Akashic records. I believe in that. Let me just go read some Akashic. Like, I go down all the various like rabbit holes. So human design in the past 4 years has helped like guide me. But the true like manifesting generator way of just taking in like the dad psychology class is this one thing on this rabbit hole that I'm talking to you. So many rabbit holes of just the content that you send me. Yeah, it just kind of all is finally starting to come together.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, like we said, on our squirrel, everything's connected. Everything's connected to everything else. And sometimes it's flapping over here and doesn't have any real value to what's going on over here, that we can see, but that doesn't mean it's not connected. Like, my hand over here is still connected to my hand over here, even though they're in completely different spaces. They are connected, and there is value in each one of these places that you're pulling information from.
I've had a lot of little moments that sort of connect dots and take me to the next place too. Like, I forget where I heard it, but someone talked about, imagine we're all just like drops of water on the planet, right? So like, we're all part of the same ocean. You might get evaporated and condensation and whatever else, but at one point you're also all part of this massive ocean. But you can be a separate drop that like gets put into somebody's cup. Like that was like an image in my mind that helped things like click. I also listened to a podcast. It might be this podcast will kill you. I don't know, but somewhere they talked about blueberries and just the very concept of an antioxidant, of how you have all these like free little, I'm going to butcher all the science because I don't care about it, but like ions, free radicals, whatever, those little electrons that need home that are flying around your body, and you eat a blueberry and it has extra. So it just completes that little ring. Like 8th grade science is coming back to me. Yeah. And so you're not aging as quickly, potentially. Like, what if we're all aging because we're all losing all these electrons when we touch things, but instead you just eat a bunch of blueberries and save those electrons, and maybe that's making you more youthful. Yeah. Like,
I mean, from a chemical standpoint, the positive charge and negative charge is losing electrons or gaining electrons. So every molecule is going to be positively charged or negatively charged based on how many electrons it has. And right. You can have different versions of the same thing that are positive or negative based on, our plus or minus, based on if they're, shedding or gaining. And, gold, the reason why it's so valuable is because it's, I believe, the most stable of all elements on the periodic chart, and it doesn't shed or gain very much, or very often. So it's a really great conductor because it's so stable. And so we're not made of gold, therefore we're not stable. Go figure, humans aren't.
I'm gold, baby.
So we're constantly in flux. So we're constantly gaining and losing all kinds of things. That would be the chemical side of things.
Yeah.
The chemistry of life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I guess the point I was just trying to make was that there's been a lot of times where I've gotten sort of stuck, and then I had a little, just like bloop, like a little moment. Yeah. Like I had the ocean metaphor, and I was like, okay, now I really get how we're all connected. Or the blueberry thing of like, okay, now I really understand like how much just eating a blueberry changes me, or touching my hand to a couch, and now I've transferred energy with them. And then when I started doing energy work with people across, the world, those points just helped me kind of understand that. Or for knowing that there's things outside of this world, the signs like I had with the duck, but I had a bigger one that was, I requested a platypus with a hat on. And I got it. And this is a whole other beautiful story that I love, but just like a moment like that. I had one with you where you led me to that podcast. I got really stuck on not wanting to fall into a trap of a specific religion, because I felt like my original religion just didn't help me. You introduced me to the monk who talked about zebras, and like if you've never seen a zebra, you might not believe like the idea of like a donkey and a tiger like coming together. What is that? And you don't believe it, and then you see a zebra and your whole world opens up. And so that allowed me to be like, who knows what kind of zebras are out there in the world that I just haven't seen yet. So I'm going to keep my mind open. I
think that's why some people become entomologists, because they're constantly finding new bugs and new species, and insects are wildly different looking than, because mammals all have some basic similarities. There's not that huge of a variety. But insects, man, there are just billions of different types of insects. And
I mean, can we talk about the ocean for a second? What?
Yeah. What's in the ocean?
We don't know what's down there.
Yeah. So
anyway.
how, and this will I think this wraps us up for this episode, because we've covered the major things and we've kind of attached it to everything. I always say one earth, same air and water, because we're all stuck on the same planet. And if anyone is coming and going from this planet and going to other planets, we don't know. That's not a collective reality. And so we can't even discuss that. But what we can discuss is that we are traveling through space on this planet. We got just one that we are conscious, aware of collectively. And whether you like it or not, we breathe the same air and we drink the same water worldwide. It circulates. And like, if that doesn't get you, I don't know what does. So now that you are really in that, does everything that you do moving forward filter through that, that ocean, as you refer to it, the ocean of everything, and your new architecture and mechanisms for dealing with each part of the machinery?
Yeah, I think the pendulum swings between putting so much through it and being like, okay, just live, like, come on, let it go, to swinging and being like, ooh, look at me, look at my awareness, look at me figuring this out, look at me, so I go back and forth. So sometimes I wish I had just used my tools even more, because I just get lost down the human experience of like, why, and then realizing I have the tools for it and then doing it. And then other times I feel like I'm over analyzing it and I should just stop putting the tools through it and just accept the experience for what it is. So I go back and forth. But
are you able to appreciate and kind of observe all of the intricacies and let yourself just experience it kind of? So
yeah, I get, yes, something like in a good game of volleyball, I'll just not be thinking about anything about how much fun I'm having. And then sometimes I stop and I realize that I'm just enjoying the moment, and then I up it and then I go, ooh, now let's just enjoy it more. And let's win. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. Let's manifest the win, like whatever. And then I'd like, and then I use my tools to like elevate it even more if it's like the good juicy parts. But I like when I get out of my head. It's just tricky for me to get out of my head, but I do love those moments when I do. Also, sometimes like I had an argument for one of the first times ever where I felt like I came out of my body and observed the argument, and them like yelling didn't do anything to me. I was just like, oh, look at like what I said shouldn't have offended them that much. And I think they're being triggered by and let me see if I can adjust that and like come at it from a different, it was just like, what? Because normally me would just immediately be angry right back or snap back or, so I've had a couple of those moments where I feel like I'm getting, I don't want to say better at that, but having that awareness and sort of stepping out has been an adventure. So I like the trajectory I'm going on, which is having more awareness overall.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's conscious decisions where you're choosing your path versus being taken down a path. It's nice to let go sometimes and have your path chosen for you, but even that is a choice. Once you are conscious, you get to make that choice.
Yeah, I think a fun homework assignment for any like people pleasers out there is like take a week where you're not allowed to ask anybody what their thought or opinion is on what you do, and just do it and see what happens. Yeah.
I like that. That's fun. I think that's a great way to end. Don't forget to leave a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. New episodes every Tuesday, and check us out on YouTube for short clips from each episode. Thank you. And until next time, remember, your life story is yours to write and rewrite as many times as you want.